one of my most requested videos is to show more wall art. Stick around because I have so many high-end wall art ideas that I recreated for a fraction of the cost. The first dupe that we're going to do is a McGee & Co. watercolor wall art, and probably my favorite one we're gonna do throughout the whole video, and I'm showing it to you first. So these wall art pieces on their website were $450 each. We're gonna put it together for a fraction of that. I found these frames at Hobby Lobby for only $11. They were 40% off, and they were the size that I needed them to be. I just needed to update them a little bit. So I picked up 3 of these. I'm going to tape off the frames, then I'm going to paint the interior, which is already white, but it's not a solid white. I'm going to use the sample white paint to paint the base white. Now to create a textured gold look to my frames, I'm going to be using some gold rub and buff and add that on with a foam brush. I'm going to repeat these steps for all 3 of my frames. I picked up some watercolor paper and I kind of cheated and made it in the size that I needed to use for these frames. And then I also grabbed some watercolors off of Amazon. I will link those below if you're interested in them, but I found that Amazon had the best deal. I want to use this wall art at the lake, so I really wanted to use some green and blue colors in my painting. Now there's really no right or wrong way to do this, and in fact I ended up repeating and changing this about 3 times, but the key is to just add in different colors of paint, and also adding in water gives it that nice kind of flowy effect. So I went through and I created 3 different paintings, and I felt like they were just a little too light. I wanted it to be more saturated and I wanted more color. So once they were dry, I went back in and I added in more paint. You can easily do that. I kept kind of the same colors. Like I had one that was blue, I had one that was more neutral and yellows, and then I had one that was green. Now, after I painted them the second time, I liked the colors better, but I wasn't happy with the design. I kind of just did a real basic design. So I went back in a 3rd time and made almost more of like a swirl design, and I liked that so much better. So that's my tip. If you're not happy with something you created, just keep going until you like the way it looks. I added E6000 to the back of my watercolors. So to attach my watercolors to the frames that I had created, I decided that I wanted them to be a little bit off center, and I was going to lay them on their sides just to make it a little bit more different, a little bit more interesting. Now to hold them down flat while they had a chance to dry, I added some books to just have a hard surface so that they could dry overnight. Like I said earlier, I decided to hang them sideways. I added them to my wall, and I just love the way they turned out. I have seen several projects on social media where people are using hot glue on canvases to create kind of a raised wall art look, and I thought I would try it out. I purchased a pack of canvas from Hobby Lobby, and I'm going to be using 2 of the canvas. I started to roughly lay out the design that I wanted on one of my canvases with just a normal pin. And then I wanted to mirror that design on my second canvas, so I lined it up next to it and just roughly drew out that design. Next, it was time to add in the hot glue. So I just started on one of my sections and began adding in the hot glue, trying to make my lines as straight as possible, but not worrying about it being too perfect. So I added in all of the hot glue that I wanted on both of my canvases. And then I took a step back because that's really important to kind of evaluate as you're going. And I decided I wanted a little bit more texture. So I came back in and added some additional lines in the middle just to give it more interest. Once the hot glue was dry, I added in 2 coats of a dark blue spray paint. Now from here, I decided I wanted to see that hot glue just a little bit better. So I recently picked up some black Rub and Buff, and I thought this is a good chance to use this. I was a little hesitant, but I figured if I didn't like it, I could just spray paint it again. I'm just going to put the Rub and Buff on the top of the hot glue. I'm really glad that I did this because it helped that hot glue stand out and give my wall art a little bit more of a presence. This was definitely a fun craft to make. You guys are gonna have to let me know what you think of it. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you comment the word of the day, which is blue. So when I was on McGee & Co.'s website, I found this next wall art piece, and it was so incredibly overpriced, but honestly so simple and something I knew that I could recreate. This wall art was over $3,000, so I thought, let's go ahead and recreate it. I found a pack of canvases at Five Below that I picked up for $5. Now for this project, you're just going to need some macrame cord and some nautical rope. I'm gonna link both of the ones that I use on a regular basis in the description box below. Now on each of my canvas, I marked where I wanted the center strip to be on both of the canvases. I started with one of my yarns and I hot glued it to the back, and then I wrapped it around, hot glued it to the other side where I'd measured, and then I continued to wrap it around, hot gluing it periodically. Now some of my tips whenever you're wrapping yarn or cord around a canvas, you want to try to keep the yarn or twine as close as you can. It just gives it much more of a high-end look and it looks a lot more seamless. Now for this project, you want to try to keep it as level as possible. That's just going to help you when you get to the ends. So I wrapped the cord around the middle, and then once I got to my other lines that I had marked off, I just hot glued it in place and cut off the excess. Now I'm going to take my other rope and hot glue that to the edge where I just stopped on my center portion, and I'm going to wrap that, hot gluing it until I get to the very end. Now, once you get to the end, you want to start adding in more hot glue just so that it gives it more longevity. It's going to hold in place when it's hanging on your wall. And I'm going to wrap it around, also making sure to completely cover your canvas. You want to make sure your canvas is completely covered, and then you can hot glue the excess onto the back. Once I do one side, I'm going to flip and do the other side. Now, I was thinking this project was actually going to take a while, but it went considerably faster than I thought. So if you're hesitant to try it, it really wasn't that long to create. Now you're going to repeat these steps on your second canvas, but you're just going to switch the material. So you're gonna start with your macrame, putting that on in the middle, and then for your edges, you can add on your nautical rope. You're gonna follow the same tips by making sure you add it really close together and covering the canvas on either of the edges. I really love this grouping of two. It adds so much texture to my walls. Now, if you watch any of my Dollar Tree shopping hauls, you may have seen this next item that I found in the stores. I thought they would be such a cool patchwork wall art, so I picked up 6 of them. I have a lot of sample paints around my office, and I grabbed some different sample paints. I grabbed 5 of them that I thought would coordinate well together and were colors that I wanted displayed in my home. And I think the best way to apply your paint is with a flat brush. So I used a flat brush and painted on the interior portion of the hexagons. As I began painting, I really wanted to lay them out together to make sure that I was happy with where all the colors were. So I laid them out and kind of picked my colors as I went. Once I got all the painting done, I E6000'd them together just to hold them in place. Let that sit overnight. The next day I wanted to give even more additional support to this, so I flipped it onto the back and I just took some popsicle sticks that I had. You could really use any wood piece that you have. I broke them in half and then I hot glued each of the seams on the patchwork wall art. And you could hang this up in your home, and I just love the texture that it provides, and it's a super unique wall art piece. Now, one of the rooms I haven't shown you guys very much at the lake is the kitchen, but I've been working on projects in the kitchen, so I want to give you like a little taste of one of the projects that I've been working on. In my kitchen, there was this really flat wall, and I really thought it'd be pretty to have some open shelving on there. So I wanted to do it myself to make it super affordable. So I went to Home Depot and I bought boards that were 1 by 8 by 6 feet long. I purchased my shelf brackets off of Amazon that fit the boards perfectly, and of course I'll link those down in the description box for you. I marked on the walls with painter's tape exactly where my studs were, because this was going to tell me exactly where I could put the brackets on the wall, because you really want to make sure that you have them screwed into a stud so it holds really well on your wall. I put together my basket sconces. These are going to go at the top of my shelves. Next, I marked off with painter's tape where I was going to hang my basket sconces as well as my shelves. For my basket sconces, you can see that there's no wires in my wall, so I didn't want to hardwire them in. So I'm going to be doing the next best thing, which is putting in puck lights. These are some of my favorite puck lights. I'll link them for you down in the description box. So I started by adding batteries into my puck lights. Once I had the batteries in there, I'm gonna use some construction adhesive to glue the basket portion to the light. I'm gonna use the same construction adhesive to glue the puck light to my sconce. and I'll let it set overnight to dry. So I really was double and triple checking my measurements. I measured exactly where I wanted my brackets to hang, and then I screwed them into the wall. Make sure that when you're putting your brackets in so that your shelf is nice and level, you want to use a large level to make sure both of your brackets are at the same height. So I got all the brackets in place. I got the bottom ones as well as the top. Now to put the sconce on the walls, I just screwed in the back plates onto my wall, and then I screwed in the wall sconces. I sanded and stained the boards and added those into my brackets. I added in some additional screws on the underside of my brackets just to hold it in place really well. Now my favorite part of this project was thrifting all the items that I was going to add to the shelves. Now I was going to add on some practical items, like I wanted to add mugs for our coffee bar, but I also wanted some decorative items. So I thrifted a lot of those items. I spray painted some of those because I really wanted more of a neutral finish on my shelf. I wanted to add some molding to the back wall on my accent wall that I painted beige, and the molding that I wanted was only available online. I wanted this molding to kind of flank my headboard. So the first thing we did was we brought our headboard back in and we centered it up on the wall so it fit perfectly. I also purchased artwork that I wanted to hang above our bed, so that was really important to kind of get that centered up as well. We put tape down to mark where our headboard is. We also decided how high we wanted the molding to be from our headboard and from the ceiling. So we started by making the cuts on the molding and doing the center section just to kind of figure out what we were doing and how this was going to work. We cut all of the pieces at a 45-degree angle. When we went to put the pieces on the wall, we also used our Roby nailer to hold them in place. And then to make sure that they were nice and straight, we used a level. And then we also used a board on the side just to make sure that it was squared and nice and straight. I think probably that top section was the hardest one just because it was our first one and we were kind of figuring it out. Once we got that in place, we wanted to do 2 rectangles on the sides. So we went through and figured out our measurements, where we wanted the pieces to lay, and then made sure that we had enough pieces, which we did. So I measured correctly before we got started. And then we made all of our cuts. Next, we went in and nailed all the pieces to the wall. Now, after you're done putting all your pieces up, this really honestly didn't take us very long to do, and it made a huge difference. In the next steps, we're going to fill the holes. We're also going to use caulking along the inside and outside of the molding. The next thing I like to do is touch-up paint. So I will cover all of the nail holes. I painted the molding, and I ended up doing 2 coats on the molding. And then I also go over the top of the baseboards where we put the caulking down, just to make sure that everything looks nice and fresh. And this does take a little bit of time, but it's so worth it, and it makes everything look great. Now Now, not every wall art piece has to take a lot of time or be super complicated. I found these 4 frames that I thought would be perfect in this guest bathroom that I was redoing at the lake. I picked them up kind of at like a vintage market that I went to, but the frames for them were not that cute, so I wanted to update the frames. So I took all of the contents out of these frames. And then I spray painted the frames with 2 coats of a white matte spray paint. Once that dried, I put all of the contents back in, and then I used command strips to hang them back on my wall in a grouping of 4. When I got the tapestry, it was all folded up and there was a lot of crease marks on it. So I went through and used my steamer and my iron to get out all the crease marks. If you end up leaving those in and you hang it up, it's just not gonna look good. I did at the end steam it as well because some of the creases were hard to get out, but just try before you put it all together to get all of the creases out before you even start this project. So I needed to create a frame to hang the tapestry on. This is really easy to do. All you need are 4 boards, and I like to grab just like the scrap boards at Lowe's or Home Depot or wherever, and I get the 1x2 inch boards. So I laid out my tapestry and then I put my boards around the edges of the tapestry. And I marked the boards where I needed to cut them to where I could fit the tapestry around the edges and staple it in place. Next, I took my framing boards and I cut them down to size. Then all you're gonna do is put them together like a big box, and then you're going to drill holes in the edge and add in your screws. It's really easy to create a frame. Now to assemble this, you're going to lay your tapestry flat on the ground with the side that you want to show facing down. You're going to put your frame on the back side. Then you're gonna set your frame on top of that. Now start at one area of your tapestry and you're going to fold it over to where it's just on the top edge, and you're gonna staple it in place. I will link to the staple gun that I use in the description box, and any other project that you see in this video, plus what I'm wearing, I always put it down in the description box. Now you're going to go to the opposite side that you just stapled on, and you want to concentrate on pulling the fabric as tight as possible, wrapping it up and stapling it in place. And you'll do it all along that side. Then take the tapestry and put it upright to staple the sides. It's really important at this step that you just pull it as tight as possible without, giving it any like weird creases, but you want the tapestry to be flat across the front. So as flat as you can get it will work great. After you get all 4 sides stapled, just go back in and cut off any excess fabric. Next, you can just use a simple screw to hang this on the wall. And if you still have any creases, just go back in with your steamer and steam them out. And for under $20, I have a huge wall art piece. You want to grab a board. I actually grabbed one that was in my garage. It's a 1x2 board, and my board was 50 inches long. Next, I stained the board with a color called Golden Oak. It's been kind of my favorite color lately. So I'm just gonna wipe it on and then wipe off any excess with a paper towel. You could use any stain color for this. Next, I'm going to use one of my favorite little macrame yarns. I will link it down below for you as well. So I needed to get 200 pieces of macrame yarn. So what I did was I took some kind of heavy duty plastic. This is the plastic that are in those IKEA frames. And I just started to wrap the macrame around the plastic. You could do this with anything that you have on hand. It ended up, my length was about 31 inches, but really this is personal preference. So I wrapped it around about 50 times. Then I cut one side off and then I cut the other side off. So I took all the strings and made a little bundle. So I ended up having 4 bundles of 50 macrame strings. So I'm going to take one of my groupings and bend it in half. Then I'm going to take some painter's tape and I'm going to tape off about, I would say, a little bit more than halfway up, maybe 3/4 of the way up. And this is going to help us when we go to paint. Now this is where you can really customize this project depending on the colors you like. So I went to Sherwin-Williams wanting to find a light blue and a dark blue color. I ended up grabbing Blustery Sky and Rainstorm, and I picked these up in samples. Whenever you buy samples, they're really inexpensive and it's the way to go. So next you're going to get a dish or a disposable little container, and I'm going to fill it up about halfway with water. Then I'm going to dump in my lighter paint color and I'm going to mix that around. Then I'm going to take each of my bundles and dip them into where the tape line is at. That way I have a consistent tape line for all of my dyeing. And this is a great way to dye your fabric. Now you want to make sure you get all of the pieces down in there. Let it set for a little bit, make sure they're coated, kind of pull it up, see if they're coated. If not, put it back in there for more. And then you're going to take it, pull it out, let all the excess drip off, and then you can put it over to dry. I had the same plastic that I used to wrap the cord and just let it sit out on that. Now I let this dry 24 hours before I came in with my darker color. So I did the same technique by adding in water with my dark color. Now when I did this, I realized that there wasn't a huge variation in the color, like it was very subtle. So what I decided to do was add in some black paint to make it a little bit darker. So I mixed the paint around. Now I did run into a problem whenever I started to dip. I realized that some of the black paint had settled to the bottom. And so if the pieces were touching the bottom, it was getting covered with black. So I had to be a little bit careful. So I suggest mixing it up better than I did. When I dip into the darker color, I'm not going to put it in all the way. I'm just going to put a little bit of the bottom portion in. Now, I wish that I would have gotten a really dark color. So that may be something, or my blue that I used at the beginning, maybe if it was a little bit lighter. So make sure your colors are really contrasting. So do that for all 4 of your colors and let them sit out to dry again. Again, I let this sit out a day. Then after a day, I removed the tape and they still needed some time to sit out. So I actually laid them out flat and gave them, probably at least a couple more hours to dry out before I did anything with them. Now, if you've seen any of my projects before where I've done this similar technique, I just laid out my board and then I'm going to take all of the strips and lay them out on the back of my board. Now, this does not have to be perfect. They do not have to be evenly spaced. Just do the best you can, kind of eyeball it. Then you're going to come through and hot glue every single piece down. Once you've hot glued, Now you have to come in, and if you have any pieces that are on the top, you want to cut those off. Now to hang this on the wall, I thought I'd be able to get away with command strips, and that's what I initially tried, but since it was a bigger piece, I ended up having to get hooks. So I recommend using like maybe some little picture hanger hooks on the back for this. But all you have to do is hang it up on your wall, then come in and cut off any excess at the bottom, like any pieces that kind of look weird. Mine actually did pretty well. I didn't have a ton of pieces that had any issues. But here is a look at how this wall hanging turned out. All right, it's your turn to vote. Let me know down in the comments which of these wall art projects was your favorite. I don't know, I really like number 1, but number 3 is one of my favorites too. Don't be afraid to try that project you've been wanting to do. And remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. Make sure you subscribe because I want to see you back here. Bye.